will never, ever surrender to the woke mob here in Florida.
What we really need in the White House is a leader, not a follower. And when you're off by half, you get things wrong.
The off-ramp here is to solve the problem, to spend less than we spent last year.
The Republican Party stands on the fact that we don't want people making decisions for us. So why should we make decisions for a woman about what to do with her own body?
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. The wait is over. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is now officially a 2024 presidential candidate. Here he was discussing his bid during a live appearance on Twitter Spaces with Elon Musk.
Well, I am running for president of the United States to lead our great American comeback. Look, we know our country's going in the wrong direction. We see it with our eyes and we feel it in our bones. Our president, well, he lacks vigor, flounders in the face of our nation's challenges, and he takes his cues from the woke mob.
For more on this, CBS News' political director, Finn Gomez, joins us now. So, Finn, on days like this, there's usually a laudatory video of the candidate. Let's take a look at one released today on Governor DeSantis' behalf.
They call it faith because in the face of darkness, you can see that brighter future. A faith that our best days lay ahead of us. But is it worth the fight? Do I have the courage? Is it worth the sacrifice? America has been worth it every single time.
Ron DeSantis in silhouette. Not face to camera, not saying anything on his own behalf, not letting people hear what he has to say or why, but just Ron DeSantis in silhouette with an American flag. What is that telling us?
It's telling us that after a year of this national flirtation, if you will, building and assembling a team and this political machine, that Ronald DeSantis has entered the game. And I think that he still is Major. I think even though he slipped in the polls of late, and in the last couple of months, still the most formidable Republican rival to take on former President Donald Trump, who has maintained and is at the top of this early field right now.
We'll get to the tough couple of months for Governor DeSantis, at least in poll relationship to Trump in a minute. But let's talk about the Twitter Spaces and Elon Musk thing. Is that trolling Trump a little bit, going to a place that he used to dominate? Is that part of it? And is there something about the Elon Musk relationship that DeSantis is trying to convey?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you recall those days covering the White House, you not covering the White House, where when the words "he's tweeting" could change the dynamic and the coverage of
an
the
entire
day.
news day.
The total news day.
It's not a news week.
It was these Trump tweets, whether it be policy insults or some sort of, everything in between. And that was Donald Trump's, Twitter that we were all following. Obviously, post January 6, 2021, when he was kicked off that site. Previous management, of course, but since then it is, I think it is an indirect way to tweak the early frontrunner, to tweak Donald Trump, and as Donald Trump's team and Donald Trump himself has been just on this constant barrage over the last couple of months at the Florida governor. So
is there something about that is trying to say that Elon Musk might be for DeSantis? Yes. I mean, frankly, Elon Musk he's a billionaire. I asked a rival camp what they thought about this, and they thought that is part of this. Part of the equation is that if
he's
not
trying
definite,
to fish
at least
for
by implication.
By implication,
right.
He does have a following. He has 140 million Twitter followers, but he also has this following, a large swath of the Republican electorate who see him as this sort of folk hero, this digital folk hero, if you will. And I think that anti-wokeism perspective that they both share. And yes, I think it does show an indirect, implicit endorsement, if you will, by some of this nascent candidacy of Ron DeSantis.
So the last 2 months, if you listen to the Trump super PAC and those who speak on behalf of it, have been disastrous for DeSantis. Yeah. He was once within high double digits, like 12, 14, 17 points of Trump. Now it's 25, 30 on national polls, which, of course, national polls, take them with a grain of salt. Sure. They don't matter in Iowa. They don't matter in New Hampshire. They don't matter in South Carolina. But they do matter in the larger conversation. What's happened to DeSantis the last couple of months?
Well, but if you go back even a little further, like if you remember last year post midterms when he won Florida by over almost 20 points over Charlie Crist, he was the heir apparent. When he was beating Trump in some of these early states in those in the polls that came out then. But since then, he's been focused on his legislative agenda that ended earlier this month in Tallahassee, which was this conservative blueprint. Of course, we talked about ad nauseum. But frankly, I mean, it's also the fact that he exposed this right flank to Donald Trump. I was with Donald Trump when he went to Davenport when he switched switched it on these attacks on Ron DeSantis, and they were largely unanswered. And so after months of that, it's going to take a toll.
Months of that, and also the place that former President Trump has found himself in the news cycle with the Manhattan DA's indictment, which he potentially, in a political, metaphorical way, monetized into sympathy campaign and rallying around him as the continued standard bearer for the Republican Party. And yet, DeSantis, I do believe, talking to those around him, believes not only does he have an image in Florida as someone who has turned a competitive state into a red state, if you will, but this legislative agenda that you talked about, they believe is ready-made for a conversation with Republican and primary caucus voters that's more contemporary than whatever Trump accomplished in the White House.
Absolutely. If you look at the list of the issues, these red meat issues, they were directed at they were directed not just at the Florida Republican base voter, but they had a national imprint, and there was called the blueprint, for a reason. And education, immigration, open carry policies, like across the board, he's been trying to utilize that as a blueprint, as momentum for a national race. And the central theme, his central message has not changed, though, Major. He wants to be the Trump without the baggage. He wants to be the representation.
Trump without the drama.
Without the drama, without the baggage, without the fatigue, if you will. And he was trying to get that consensus of the never Trumpers and some pro-Trump MAGA supporters. And he had, at least in the early part of this cycle, he had been garnering that support. That's changed.
And the Trump super PAC ready for today's announcement from DeSantis, unofficial or official or soft or preliminary as it is, with its own advertisement. Let's take a look at that.
In Washington, one was a leader and one let us down. Even DeSantis admitted there are big differences between him and Trump.
Obviously there is, because I've been outvoted contrary to him in the Congress.
It is obvious, Ron. President Trump is the only one ready on day one to deliver for us again.
Trump world has an answer about DeSantis every hour of every day. It seems fair to say, Finn, not obsessed, but highly focused on DeSantis and trying to blow him out of this race. It is, in its own way, an indirect compliment.
Absolutely. They still see him as their main political threat, not only because of the fundraising, the political operation, name ID. It's so far at this point he's been the only one to really rival Trump, and to kind of get into his arena, if you will. But if you still see the national polling, again, as we mentioned, it doesn't matter in Iowa, but it's still a 30-point difference. That does matter. It's still early.
And in this conversation, while we've been talking, Finn, DeSantis has just released a new ad making it officially official. Let's take a look.
We showed that we can and must revitalize America. We need the courage to lead and the strength to win. I'm Ron DeSantis, and I'm running for president to lead our great American comeback.
There it is. Looking into the camera, speaking on his own terms. Different from what we saw just a few moments ago, but that's DeSantis saying, here I am, take a look, let's go.
He's saying, I am a presidential candidate.
Right.
Finally saying those words. And per some sources close to the governor, they say that he's now going to punch back versus Trump and some of his other rivals.
Let's talk about money. In the DeSantis circles, they put the number at roughly $200 million. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, money doesn't win you the presidency. Just ask Jeb Bush or Michael Bloomberg or lots of others. Scott Walker.
Right.
But money isn't irrelevant. It matters. And the DeSantis folks have been pretty aggressive about saying they're going to plow this money through the super PAC into a ground game operation, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. That can be great. Having ground operations, knocking on doors, making phone calls, all of that works. But the candidate at a retail level has to sell what the ground team is offering. Can DeSantis do it?
So far, he has struggled mightily with that component. As you know, recently in his recent trip to New Hampshire, the Granite State, he had some missteps, some flaps that were widely mocked on social media. It is something that he has to work on. Again, like a source close to DeSantis told me that their secret weapon is his wife, Casey, who is more sociable and can connect with those voters. And they also see that their words, this wholesome appearance of this couple, in especially states like Iowa, where the evangelical vote is so strong, that he can make inroads. He's already met with some of the most influential evangelical leaders there. So,
but in the end, as impressive as Casey DeSantis is, and she quite clearly is, her name's not on the ballot and won't be. Vin Gomez, thank you so much.
Thanks, Major.
Debt ceiling negotiations remain at a stalemate. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us now from Capitol Hill. Nicole, catch us up. What's the state of play?
Well, the state of play appears to be changing, of course. Earlier today, Speaker McCarthy said that he thought both sides were far apart. Now he's saying that things are going a little better after congressional negotiators went over to the White House this afternoon. He still stopped short of saying that there is any type of deal or agreement on the horizon. And so I asked him earlier about the end game. What is the off-ramp here?
Look, the off-ramp here is to solve the problem, to spend less than we spent last year. That's not that difficult. They still want to spend more. You cannot do that. No household will do that. Look, I explained this before.
What specifically in their plan is unreasonable?
Well, they don't have a plan.
So, of course, the White House does have a proposal that they have put on the table, which involves freezing spending. They've also expressed a willingness, for instance, to potentially claw back some of that unspent COVID money. They've also said that they're willing to consider budget caps, and the Speaker acknowledged that that is one of the areas that they're debating. Of course, the Speaker pushing for a 10-year budget cap. The White House wants something significantly less. So still many differences that remain, but at least some optimism from the Speaker late today that things are starting to progress.
And Nicole, you talked to some people who are involved in the Problem Solvers Caucus. That is a famously bipartisan caucus. What did they tell you about what they're hearing and what they might vote for?
Well, they acknowledge that any deal is likely going to need bipartisan support. And so, they were encouraged that things appear to be getting better. Take a listen to their thoughts.
We always knew this was going to be tough. These are tough negotiations. They're dealing with some very, very sensitive issues. So nobody expected them to walk in there and have an agreement the first night.
I think we're playing with fire right now, because we're getting very close to that date. And, at some point, the markets and therefore people's savings and the economy and a potential recession are looming, and you don't want to go over the hump there.
So again, that's Congressman Gottheimer and Fitzpatrick, both co-chairs of the Problem Solvers Caucus. And what they told me is that they have been kicking around some ideas internally, that they have been having discussions with the negotiators, those who are negotiating for Speaker McCarthy, to say, hey, here's what some members could support. They wouldn't go into detail about what those ideas are, but they did suggest that they, too, are engaged in this process. Of course, we know that the Speaker's chief negotiators are Congressman Graves, Congressman McHenry. Those have been the primary negotiators on the front lines. But again, there has been this line of communication with these bipartisan members to see what could ultimately potentially garner some bipartisan support.
And Nicole, just to underscore the importance of what you just described, as I've heard and talked to people on the Hill, when this deal gets done, whatever it looks like, it's not going to be a uniparty thing. Both parties are going to have to vote for it. And there are going to be dissatisfied people on the hard left, and there are going to be dissatisfied people on the hard right. And getting that sweet spot is going to be a matter of a complicated whip effort, meaning finding the votes and collaborating between parties.
Well, exactly. And that's what both of these co-chairs referenced. You know, Congressman Gottheimer acknowledged that any deal is going to need significant support from Democrats. He wouldn't give it an exact number and kind of pointed to Republicans who, as you mentioned, obviously will have to kind of whip these votes together. But it is a very tenuous situation. And then, of course, as you know, the House is due to recess potentially as soon as tomorrow, although members are being told to stay close. So this is a very fluid situation.
Yeah, first you get the deal, then you got to find the votes. Nicole Killian, thank you so very much. President Biden is calling once again for action on gun violence on this, the one-year anniversary since the Uvalde, Texas massacre. 19 children and 2 teachers at Robb Elementary School died in that shooting. President Biden spoke about the tragedy at the White House earlier today.
Standing there in Uvalde, Jill and I couldn't help but think that too many schools, too many everyday places have become killing fields in communities all across every part of America. And in each place, we hear the same message. Do something. For God's sake, please do something.
The president also said there should be a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy have burnished their political brand, at least in part, by taking on so-called wokeism. So what would a primary matchup between the two of them actually look like? Well, Vivek Ramaswamy joins us to discuss his take on that question. You're streaming America Decides.
We've got to fight the woke in the businesses. We've got to fight the woke in the universities. We've got to fight the woke in the bureaucracy. And we will never, ever surrender to the woke mob here in Florida. This is where woke goes to die.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was Governor Ron DeSantis with a somewhat familiar refrain taking on what he describes as wokeness. And he's not the only candidate taking that message to 2024 Republican primary and caucus voters. Republican presidential candidate and author of Woke Inc., Vivek Ramaswamy, joins us now. Vivek, great to see you.
Good to see you.
So, Ron DeSantis considers himself more anti-woke than any other Republican in this race. Is he?
Look, I think that I wrote the book on this and I've worked with Governor DeSantis to educate him on this issue over the years. I'm glad to see how he's implemented that agenda in part, although imperfectly, in the state of Florida. I think the deeper question is, wokeness is a symptom of what? It is a symptom of a national identity crisis in this country, where we hunger for the answer to what it means to be an American. There's a black hole of identity amongst young Americans where we're hungry for a cause, for purpose, for meaning. And so I go beyond just being anti-woke. My question is, how do we fill that moral hunger in our country with a vision of what it actually means to be American? That is how we lead the country out of a national identity crisis. Not just running from something, but running to something. And I think that's the difference between me and Governor DeSantis.
So, Vivek, as you know, later on, Ron DeSantis will formally announce his presidential campaign on Twitter Spaces with Elon Musk and David Sachs. Is the governor trying to steal your tech bro thunder?
You know, I never call myself a tech bro anyway. And so I'm somebody who's created things. I've built companies. I've developed and overseen the development of medicines, 5 of which are FDA approved today. Very different. Governor Ron DeSantis has had his entire career in politics, and that's fine. But I think that the Republican Party, I think the country is hungry for an outsider. Somebody who's actually accomplished things outside of politics, who's created things in the world, seen the problems firsthand and actually solved them. That's what I'm aiming to do in this race. But I think that Ron DeSantis' entry is welcome from my standpoint. More competition breeds strength. We need to be having a rich debate about what do we stand for? Why do we stand for it? And as long as we make it about that, rather than some boring biographical brawl between Trump and DeSantis, each attacking each other and boasting about their own accomplishments, I don't think that does much for the country. But if we're debating what we stand for and why, which is what I'm bringing to this race, I think it's going to make our country better. And I think that's the kind of leader we need in the White House.
Vivek, you and I had a long conversation on my show, The Takeout, and in that conversation, I let you deal with some stories that had cropped up then. A story that's cropped up this week, Martin Shkreli, convicted of securities fraud, says you were one of his biggest investors and he calls you a friend. Are those two things true?
No, they're not true. But one of the things that is true is that when I was actually at a hedge fund, the part that was true is that as part of a portfolio of investments, hundreds and actually thousands of companies that we evaluated, one of the companies, the public companies that he started, was in the portfolio. One of the things I wrote about him actually in Woke Inc., though, because the sad part is much of what Big Pharma does is really just a disguised version of what he did at a different company that he started, the one that made him famous, was jacking prices. Turns out Big Pharma does that regularly in our country, but they disguise it under the veneer of stakeholder capitalism, under the veneer of social responsibility. And the irony is they're actually directing accountability away from some of the very same kinds of behaviors that are different, maybe in degree, but not in kind. And so one of the things I've done in Woke Inc. is to really call out the ways in which much of big business, even Big Pharma, is really guilty of the very things they try to distance themselves from by blowing woke smoke to deflect accountability for their actual behaviors. And so I've been unafraid in calling that out, and I've seen it from the other side. It's part of what gives me a voice here is I'm not just some sort of author who's written books. I've done that, but I'm doing it based on experiences that I've had in the real world, including in the world of elite business in this country. And I'm unsparing in revealing what that's actually all about.
Vivek, you have a PAC called American Exceptionalism. What is the role, formally or informally, in that PAC of Corey Lewandowski, former campaign manager to Donald Trump?
I have nothing to do with the PAC, so I couldn't tell you who's doing what for the PAC. I did read something about it in the news recently. Of course, PACs are entirely separate from the campaign. I'm focused on the campaign. And my view is one of the things that's unique about how I did start this campaign is the normal procedure for getting into a political campaign as a politician is you ring a tin can and ask a bunch of donors for permission to run, hat in hand. I didn't follow that model. I can't bring myself to do that anyway. My family and I, we put a $10 million plus 8-figure check into the campaign to start this, then got a bunch of small dollar donors. We're approaching 40,000 unique individual donors who have made donations to this campaign. That's the grassroots approach that's going to lift this up, hopefully all the way across the finish line next year. I refuse to be somebody else's puppet, so that's the way we're running things over here.
So when you read about Corey, one of the questions that raised was, is your campaign a stalking horse for the former president to take down DeSantis? Is it?
That would be a bizarre thing to do. I'm running against Donald Trump. I'm running against Ron DeSantis. But more importantly, I'm running for this country and reviving what it means to be American. I've drawn contrasts from both of them. Talked to you earlier about some of my contrasts from DeSantis. With respect to Trump, my goal is to take the America First agenda even further than Donald Trump took it. And I think we can do that if we're doing it based on first principles and moral authority, not just vengeance and grievance. America First doesn't belong to Trump. It doesn't belong to DeSantis. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the people of this country. I'm the first millennial ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican, and I'm doing it because I think I am best positioned to pass on that American identity to the next generation of Americans. That is why I'm in this race to do what Reagan did in 1980. I'm in this race to deliver that in 2024, revive a missing national identity, and I think we can do it.
On the trail in Columbus, Ohio, Vivek Ramaswamy, thanks for joining us. Safe travels.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
South Carolina became the latest state to pass an abortion ban. What the state's female legislative members are saying about that bill and how it might impact access to abortions across the South. You are streaming America Decides.
I cried this morning, actually. I feel like so much weight was on our shoulders.
Welcome back to America Decides. South Carolina's legislature has enacted a ban on nearly all abortions after 6 weeks. The state Senate passed the bill yesterday, and the Republican governor, Henry McMaster, has promised to sign it. For more, CBS News reporter Sarah Ewall-Weiss joins us now from Columbia, South Carolina. Sarah, what are the details in this bill?
Well, this, as you said, is a 6-week ban with limited exemptions. What we know about it is that there are exemptions for rape and incest. Those go through 12 weeks. There are also exemptions for women, depending on their health and the life of the mother, as well as fatal fetal anomalies. But this really is something where you think about it, women are very unaware that they're pregnant in most cases at 6 weeks. There are some other restrictions in it. It does require women to visit a doctor more often. It also has some reporting provisions when it comes to the exemption for rape and incest. with law enforcement. But this is one in a series of efforts here in South Carolina to further restrict abortion since Roe was overturned about a year ago.
So what are the state's Senate's 5 female members, all who voted against this bill, saying about not only its passage, but its likely impact on women, not only in South Carolina, but across the South?
You know, these 5 women in the Senate are the only women in the Senate out of 46 senators here, and all of them fought against this bill. They actually were able to block a near total abortion ban earlier this year with the help of 3 Republican male senators. But those 3 men all voted for this ban. CBS News was able to sit down for the first time with all 5 women after this bill passed this morning, and they talked about being sad. They are extremely frustrated, but they also talked about the hope and that the fight goes on. I want to play what they had to say specifically about what this ban means for South Carolina, but also the South.
My thoughts last night went straight to the women and girls of South Carolina who are going to be impacted in such a traumatic way, especially those who don't have the means or the income to have access to health care in a state like South Carolina where, you know, we haven't expanded Medicaid. We haven't done anything to put women in particular and girls on a level playing field. It's just another slap in the face for all of our women and girls across the state.
The Republican Party stands on the fact that we don't want people making decisions for us. So why should we make decisions for a woman about what to do with her own body, especially when she doesn't even know? You don't know you're pregnant when you're 6 weeks pregnant. I mean, so why should we? How do you know?
And you know, with this ban passing in South Carolina, it really further restricts abortion access across the entire South. The only state here in the South where abortion has remained relatively unrestricted is Virginia. But abortion restrictions are being passed by legislatures across the country. In the past week alone, we saw a 12-week ban pass in North Carolina after Republicans overrode the governor's veto. We also saw an abortion ban in Nebraska pass. We saw restrictions in Montana pass. Those are currently being fought in the courts, and now we have South Carolina. But across the country, since Roe was overturned about a year ago, more than 25 states have moved to further restrict abortion access.
Sarah Ewald-Weiss coming to us from Columbia, South Carolina. Thank you. That does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You are streaming CBS News.